Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I am the chair of the Sea Scout Marketing Committee and the Western Region Vice President for the Older Youth Programs. We'll give everyone a moment to arrive as people are logging in from across the country. Uh, we have a fascinating presentation in store for you where we're going to talk about Generation Z, who are our customers in scouting, the youth. And I see people are coming in from all over the country right now with the participant number climbing. I'm going to launch a poll while we wait just so we get to know our audience and who is with us today. So, please feel free to click the poll answers that we have with number 1. Do you use any of the following technologies to assist with Sea Scout advancement? YouTube videos, web-based games, on the online Sea Scout manual, materials that can be read on a small smartphone. Now, please take a moment and share your answers. We also have questions on how do you communicate with Scouts? Do you use email or group text or group chat in a messaging app or a Facebook group or the phone tree? We also have how do you communicate with parents? Is it an email list, group text, group chat in a messaging app, Facebook group, and a phone tree, just to see if there are differences and how you communicate with your Scouts and your parents of your Scouts. And as people are logging in, because it's on the West Coast, it's the lunch hour. On the East Coast, it's 3 o'clock. And we have multiple time zones in place. We're going to let people just have a moment so they can log in and enjoy the material today. And we do have answers coming in, and I do appreciate that. So with us today is Miss Milira Cox. She is at Montclair State University, and I'll let her go into more detail, but she is helping with the BEST study, which is a big study that we're doing in scouting that gets into age-appropriate activities and a whole lot more, and that should be coming out soon, and I look forward to when that happens. So Ms. Cox understands our program, that we have multiple programs in scouting, and really appreciate her time to help us understand our youth, what they are like, interests, and how we can work better with them in our youth program. So with that, I'm going to close the poll right now. So we'll end it and we'll share the results. And we can see we do have a lot of folks who are sharing information that can be read on a smartphone. That's pretty cool. We also have good use of the online Sea Scout manual. We don't have many web-based games such as Cohort or Socrative being used, but that is interesting to see. Email is the clear lead when it comes to communicating with Scouts. But group text was only behind by 1 vote. Same with group chat. Facebook groups were only at 41%. Phone trees with Scouts down to 18, and with the parents, email list was a strong leader with similar results for the others. Group text only 47% with parents, group chat 41%, Facebook groups 47%, phone tree that's down to 12. So again, what might have worked in the 80s or even the early 90s is not how we can work with youth today for, letting people know when meetings are taking place. So with the polls concluded, and that has given everyone a chance to log in, I'm going to turn the show over to Milira to help us understand Generation Z. Ms. Cox?
Hi, everyone. My name is Milira Cox. I am a doctoral research fellow at the Institute for Research on Youth Thriving and Evaluation, also known as the Wright Institute. I am also a licensed marriage and family therapist and current PhD student in family science and human development. And we're housed at Montclair State University in New Jersey. Thank you all for joining me, and it is a pleasure to present today. I am excited to share with you all a new perspective on the topic of working with today's newest generation and their parents. Honestly, when I first learned about the opportunity to give a presentation on how to work with Generation Z, I had a lot of questions. Who is Generation Z? What do we know about them? How are they talked about in the media or research literature? And so like any modern person, I Googled Generation Z, of course, just to see what would come up. And I filtered by news. To my surprise, there were quite a few headlines about the newest generation. And one title that I found interesting read, Gen Z doesn't like branding, so Doritos tries a new approach. I kept scrolling. The next title to catch my eye, forget waiting on millennials, Gen Z is starting to buy homes. Okay. And Gen Z is stressed, depressed, and exam obsessed. For most youngsters, getting good grades is a bigger worry than drinking or unplanned pregnancies. I was puzzled by all of this. Who doesn't like branding? And who's starting to buy homes in this economy? And when did grades become the new obsession, scarier than unplanned pregnancy? Who are they even talking about? More importantly, what can I share with my audience that they may not know from a family science and human development perspective? Today, I'll talk about the term generation, how it's used, and what we mean when we use it. I'll talk about the newest generation, the newest social generation, Gen Z, also referred to as post-millennials. I'll share some information about their parents. We'll discuss the idea of gaining a deeper connection with this generation by focusing on individuality and why that matters. And I'll share things that you can do to create a meaningful connection with Gen Z. Lastly, I'll wrap up with any questions you may have or general comments pertaining to today's presentation at the end. So what do we mean by generation? The term generation is widely used within the field of social science and in different industries such as marketing research and media. Historically, the term has been used to describe the structure of a family's lineage or to denote the parent-child relationship. As illustrated in this picture, you and your siblings or cousins are one generation. Your parents and their siblings are another generation. And of course, your grandparents and their siblings are part of a completely different generation. So there could be 3 living generations within a family at any given time. However, the term generation is commonly used synonymously with the term cohort. A cohort is defined as a group of people within a delineated population who experience the same significant event within a given period of time. For instance, in graduate school, I was a part of a cohort of 6 people because we all started the program at the same time. So the significant event in this example was the beginning of our graduate program. The term cohort can also be used to describe a birth cohort, or a group of people who were born at or around the same time. Birth cohort is typically what is referred to when you hear different terms describing social generations, or generations at the population level as opposed to the familial level. We use the term generation to make sense of the differences between age groups in the larger society and to locate ourselves and others within historical time. In other words, social generations or labels were created to underline the significance of biological age grouping to understand the process of social change and continuity at the population level over time. It's important to remember that when these terms are used in marketing research and in the media, they're used to describe trends and sometimes stereotypes of an entire population of people. Pew Research Center has defined Generation Z as those who were born in or after 1997. So the oldest person of this group will turn 22 years old in 2019. Although it seems likely that all parents of Gen Z would be considered millennials since they are the closest in chronological order, there are a few factors that we should keep in mind when trying to pinpoint which generation the parents of Generation Z actually fall into. For instance, previously valued markers of adulthood, such as getting married, having children, and moving out on your own, are commonly postponed. Some may choose to delay starting a family and having children, for instance, if they have decided to pursue a higher level of education, while others may have had children in their teens or early 20s. So it's kind of a spectrum. Also, the structure of the family has changed over the past 70 years or so. The structure of a family may not reflect what has been called the nuclear family, a household of two parents and their children, and possibly a pet. Today's families can take many different shapes, such as single-parent households, step families or blended families, divorced families, foster or adoptive families. Also, it's not uncommon for grandparents or other relatives to take on more of a parental role in the case of absent or unavailable or even incarcerated parents. Therefore, it is harder to generalize which social generation the parent of Generation Z fall into, because they could be millennials, Generation X, or even baby boomers, depending on the parent's age and the structure of the family. Social generation literature underlines the experience of social events at the population level. So think of them as historical markers in time. These events are mostly related to American and popular culture. For example, they could range from national or international events such as wars like Vietnam, 9/11, changes in the economy such as a recession, increases in mass shootings, natural disasters. They could also include elections, popular TV shows, and music. And also, advances in technology should also be listed, such as the use of social media, Google, smartphones, Uber, easier access to information, and instant gratification and connection with others. And these events are experienced by or witnessed by everyone at the national or international level, so across the entire population. However, it is also important to understand how the collective experience of a group may differ depending on age and stage of development, especially when we consider how large the span of ages or social generation can be. For instance, a 5-year-old who is technically part of Generation Z will not have the same characteristics, experiences, thoughts, or level of development as a 22-year-old. So age-related developmental trends can further help us to understand where a person is in the life course. When it comes to understanding Generation Z, it is important to consider where they are in terms of stages of development. For the sake of this presentation, I will briefly describe the stages of adolescent development specifically. Middle childhood, early adolescence, ages 6 to 11, is a period of steady growth, brain maturation, and intellectual advances, making this a time for more independence as children learn to care for themselves while becoming aware of others. Adolescence, ages 11 to 18, is a period of change, from biological changes to developing a sense of identity. Adolescence is a time for growth and self-discovery and preparation for the future. And late adolescence, young adulthood, ages 18 to 25, is characterized by continued learning and exploring. Young adulthood is a time for preparing for the rest of life. Considering the age range of the program, Sea Scouts are typically in adolescence or late adolescence, young adulthood. As I mentioned previously, it is important to consider stages of development when thinking about social generation trends that we see or hear in the media or in marketing research reports. Just as someone who is 5 years old may not be the same as someone who is 22 years old, all 22-year-olds will not have the same experiences, characteristics, thoughts, or levels of development depending on their circumstances. So how else might they differ? Well, in 2014, the United States Department of Health and Human Services published a report titled "The Changing Face of America's Adolescents." It was reported that Generation Z made up roughly 42 million, or 13.2% of the population in the United States, and that number was expected to grow. And of that 42 million, half were age 10 to 14, and the other half ages 15 to 19. 51% were male. Gender nonconforming and transgender youth were not identified in this report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at the time. This graphic was also included in the report to illustrate how the proportion of adolescents who are racial and ethnic minorities is expected to change in the future. In 2014, more than half, or 54%, of the United States adolescents were white. However, this number is projected to drop to 40% as Hispanic and multiracial teens come to represent a larger share of the population. Also, as an increasing number of minority families continue to participate in national surveys such as the census. And if you can see the graphic where it says 0.9%, AIAN alone stands for American Indian, American Native alone, and below that, HPI alone stands for Hawaiian Pacific Islander alone. So those measures were strictly to those ethnicities, not including multiracial backgrounds. Although this is not the experience of every adolescent, poverty is a reality for many adolescents living in the United States. In 2014, almost 1 in 5 adolescents, or 18%, were living in families with incomes below the federal poverty line. That's 7.5 million adolescents ages 10 to 19 years old. Poverty rates were especially high for children growing up in a single-parent family. And growing up in poverty can have negative health implications for adolescents. Compared to adolescents in higher income families, adolescents in lower income families have poorer academic outcomes and have also been more likely to be uninsured. According to Pew Research Center, on average, the parents of Gen Z or post-millennials have a higher level of education than the parents of millennials and those of previous generations. This pattern most likely contributes to the relative affluence of the households in which Gen Z children live. More than 4 in 10 Generation Z youth are living with at least one parent who has a bachelor's degree or higher. Most adolescents in the United States live in or just outside of an urban area. Where adolescents live affects the number and types of services that they are able to receive or can access. Their location can also affect their health behaviors. Adolescents in urban areas, particularly those who live in poverty, may be exposed to higher levels of certain environmental toxins, violent crime, and may live in neighborhoods with limited options to purchase healthy food. Urban children are more likely than rural children to have access to community or recreation centers and parks or playgrounds. More than 6 million adolescents live in rural areas, and contrary to popular belief, rural adolescents are more likely to be poor than adolescents in urban areas. Rural families also face barriers accessing services due to the shortage of providers and transportation challenges. Youth in rural areas are more likely to be overweight or obese, to spend more time watching television or videos, and live with someone who smokes compared to their urban and suburban counterparts. Interestingly, rural adolescents are more likely to share meals with their family and attend religious services, both of which are linked with more positive health outcomes. So usually when I give a presentation, I'll share my personal connection to the topic. And for this presentation, my experience happened a couple of years ago. I was a clinician at a residential treatment facility providing counseling services to a group of teen girls who were in foster care. When I started the job, I was told by many people that it would be challenging. But I remember thinking, well, how hard could it be? I remember when I was a teen, it wasn't too long ago, and things aren't that different. I'm not that old. Besides, I have worked with difficult clients before, and I have worked with young people before. This shouldn't be too challenging. But of course, I was wrong. The first few weeks, I struggled to connect with the girls. I thought, okay, this is just another form of therapist-client rapport building. I just have to be patient and stop putting so much pressure on making a connection. It wasn't until a few months into my new role that I finally realized why it was so challenging to connect with my group in the beginning. Not only was I the new clinician, aka an outsider, I was also different. I grew up in a different time, a different area, under different circumstances. And I had assumed that the girls would see me as a young African American female professional, an understanding, compassionate therapist, and of course, later on, some of them did. But who they saw was a person who looked like them on the outside, but was different in many ways. From my speech and level of education, to my clothes, my hair, and the way I smiled all the time. Yes, one of the girls even pointed out that I smile all the time. They even compared our living circumstances, referencing their life before entering foster care. They wanted to know if I lived in a building or a house. I was puzzled because at the time I lived in an apartment. Well, is there an elevator? They questioned. No, it's a 3-family house. So you live in a house. Okay, but why does that matter? They were keeping score of all the ways we were different, different generation, life experiences, different background, just different. And they thought that I wouldn't understand what they were experiencing. It wasn't until I allowed myself to be vulnerable, acknowledging the ways we were very similar and also completely different, that I finally began to build a deeper connection with some of the girls. They began to see that even with our differences, I was still there, approachable, accepting, relatable, and willing to understand how their differences shaped their experiences, their realities. When thinking about connecting, we don't think about connecting with an entire population of youth. We think about connecting with individuals, even if it's a larger group of individuals. So in order to connect at the individual level, it's important to understand what factors contribute to making that individual who they are. What shapes their reality? The interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, ability creates overlapping and interdependent systems that ultimately shape individual experiences. We have to take into account one's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexity of challenges they face. So, understanding what it's like for a person when looking at all of their social identities held up together. Embracing individuality can help young people develop their social identity during adolescence and young adulthood. It also promotes belongingness and connectedness, both of which have positive impacts on youth development. Intergenerational mentoring can also have positive effects on youth development. As Sea Scouts mentors and volunteers, there are a few things that you can do to build meaningful connections with the newest generation of Scouts without making assumptions based on generational stereotypes, which has been known to create a generation gap or wedge between adults and youth. Your role as a volunteer or mentor is to teach, guide, sponsor, or influence youth by providing critical help, guidance, and resources. To make a lasting connection, start by inquiring about what they care about and value. Help create an environment of acceptance and mutual learning. Help them to develop positive connections with peers, characterized by support, care, and acceptance. Facilitate conversations that allow them to think about their personal values, desires, feelings, and thoughts. And have conversations that help adolescents dissect their emotions, encouraging them to reason about situations based on their internal understanding and practice perspective taking. This supports self-awareness and helps them to navigate situations and people they encounter in the world. But don't forget about parents. It is hard to fully understand a child's experience without understanding their relationship with their parents and family. And further, it is difficult to maintain a positive connection with youth without developing a connection with their parents. So get to know their family. Also, miscommunication about expectations between parents and volunteers can cause conflict. Learn what parents are expecting out of the program and be clear about expectations for behavior, communication, and participation. Out-of-school time activities are known to be supportive spaces where young people can grow and thrive. A common misconception is that the parent-child relationship is strained during teenage years because it is a time of rebellion, when in reality, the class of generational differences between a parent and child is what causes the most strain. Creating an environment where youth are encouraged to develop their own thoughts, feelings, and values will allow parents to grow with rather than in opposition of their developing teen. As a mentor, you can help parents create a space where their developing teen can be autonomous, critical thinkers by modeling supportive behaviors. Lastly, making a connection with youth other than your own child can be challenging. Be patient with yourself and with them. Be yourself and have fun. Any questions?
Thank you so much. Now, we do have our Q&A tool, so please feel free if you have a question to type it in, and we will answer them as best we can. Well, we'll give people an opportunity to type in some questions. I did put together a couple in advance while people can type. And so here's one to discuss is, in scouting, we're hands-on adventure. Our programs have advancement or awards. And I'd like to get your thought on different learning models that youth of Gen Z have and the use of technology. And in some articles, they talk about the use of YouTube and some of the app games that could be used for education. Have you seen that, and do you have any thoughts on that?
Let me think. I know that using the internet and technology itself can be a positive tool. I have seen where people will show a YouTube video as part of a lecture or as part of a training, just to see how something is done. Also, just tailoring your approach or your technology, your technique to fit the needs of teens or younger people. If you recognize that your teens may not have, as long of an attention span as you may have or as an adult may have, perhaps adjusting or tailoring your approach to meet that need. Short YouTube videos, visuals instead of long lectures if you're explaining how to do something, having tools online. I hear that, there might be like a handbook or information about an advancement that there may be physical copies, but perhaps having them available online so that they can access on a smartphone or through a computer, that may be tailoring your approach to their needs.
Excellent. Well, we have 4 questions that have come in. So the first is from Brian, and it is, what do you recommend as the best ways to communicate with teens and their parents? This might go to different technology that's available for communication.
Well, first, I would say the best way to communicate would be getting their preference. When you talk to different individuals, they may have different preferences. For instance, where a parent may prefer email or Facebook, the scout or the child may prefer a quick text or group text. So getting to know the best way to get in touch with them, and also the best time, because that might vary. Students may text or respond to things while they're at school or after school, but parents may work, and so they may not be able to get around to something until the end of the day. So asking questions about personal preferences would probably be the best approach.
Okay. The next question is, are there any main differences or uniqueness between Gen Z and the millennials and boomers, etc.?
The main difference that I can think of is Generation Z was born into an already technologically advanced world, whereas the other generations were either born before or as it was developing. And so Generation Z would be, I don't want to say the product of a technologically advanced world, but they kind of are. They might have expectations for instant gratification. Everything is easy to access online. If you have a question or you think about something, you can just put it in a search engine like Google and you'll have your answer. Whereas other generations, in order to get an answer, they may ask another person, or they may, I don't know if people remember encyclopedias and going to the library to, do your research, but that's one of the examples that I can think of differences. But you can also think about what was happening during the time of each of those periods. So thinking of what was going on that might have shaped the experience of millennials or Generation X, baby boomers, things like that.
Okay. Next question is it better to organize an event than introduce a peer to discuss the details of the event?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, and this might be a little hard to get. Is it better to organize an event than introduce a peer to discuss the details of the event?
I'm not actually sure. I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, that might be depend on the group, and that might be deeply, depend on the individual. But that's interesting. Next up is how do we best advertise high adventure activities given the attention span of 3 to 8 seconds, the time to see a reply to a text message?
Well, I'm not familiar with high adventure events or activities, but I would imagine a visual perhaps, or a short video of the excitement or the fun, to tailor your approach instead of just talking about it or giving a lecture or passing out a handout that they would actually have to read. I would understand that, or would imagine that they might be visual learners, and that might draw them in, instead of having them read what the fun would be, or those expectations of what they can get during a high adventure activity.
This is a thoughtful one and a complex one for I know many volunteers. The question is, I have a single parent mom whose son is acting out. How do I talk to him without placing a wedge between him and his mom?
Well, without more information about what's going on, I would say talk to the parent first. Maybe the parent understands what's going on, or can give you some insight into what's happening, and maybe having one of those, I don't know if I understand that Boy Scouts, you can't really have one-to-one, but maybe a 2-to-1 conversation just to see what's going on. I would definitely start with the parent, because usually parents have a better insight or can understand what's going on. Or even talking to one of the Scouts' friends, not in like a gossipy way, but just to, ask, well, how is that person doing? And getting another perspective.
Okay. Next question. In your research, do you find Scouts are dealing better with stress and emotional wellness because of what they do in Scouts?
I actually don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure, and I'm imagining that this is about the BSA BEST study.
Mm-hmm.
I work in a different area than the survey part of it, so I don't have an answer for that right now.
Yeah, and to the person who asked the question, I theoretically that should be in the BEST study. So when we see that, so and I do stress theoretically, but we'll definitely make a note of your question and see if we can do some digging and find out more details for you. Next question. How would youth in this generation react to not having access to their phones or technology?
That would be a cruel experiment, but also a very interesting one. That would be a challenge, because it's not even a generational thing. I think we as a society right now, we're just so engaged with our technology, our devices, and to go more than a few minutes without checking or looking something up, it's a challenge. There's so much, we place such high value on what our smartphones can do. We connect with people, we have access to information, there's entertainment, there's so much that you can do with your phone that it would definitely be hard to, I guess I wouldn't imagine going a day without a phone, but that would be a challenge.
So there's a second part to this. Is there a recommended method to help teens understand there's an acceptable time to use their phones and other times when it's not? Like selfies at a funeral seem like a really bad idea, but that's happened.
Right. I would say modeling that behavior, you know, just setting that expectation and also being clear about boundaries and what's appropriate and what's not. They will, or anyone, they'll do things if they don't know that it's not appropriate. But we as the adults have to reinforce and teach that that's not okay.
Yes. Other question about the poll, can we send out the results? And the answer is, I believe so. I'll check and we'll include that in the follow-up email. We have another question. How can leadership better assist potential emotional health issues, such as safe from harm, mental health first aid, training? I think some of this might go to, the suicide prevention material that we have as well, but your thoughts?
I would say getting the training, even if you're just doing some light researching on Google or online, become familiar with what you mean by emotional health, or any challenges that you recognize within the group that you work with. Get prepared, or prepare yourself by getting trained, just so that you can be aware of what it looks like and know how to respond to it. If you aren't really sure what to do in the moment, it could be because you haven't gotten the proper training, and that might be something that leaders, or I'm not really sure how it works, but higher up, they may be able to point you in the right direction of where you can get those resources as part of the Sea Scouts program.
Yeah, we do have a lot of helpful material. I know some of the suicide prevention material is new. I've kept an eye on that because of things that have happened in the area where I live with youth and self-harm. So it's a big, serious issue. So I would recommend checking that out, and some of the other youth protection material that we have is helpful as well. But it's definitely something we should always be keeping an eye out, because it's, we provide a safe place for youth.
Also, checking in with other volunteers just to see how they may handle a situation. I'm not sure if there are many popular Facebook groups, but there might be Facebook groups available just where people can share information on common experiences. It's helpful to have a forum where you can reach out to other people who may be having similar experiences to you, and understanding their experience and how they've dealt with it.
Yeah, very good, very good. And so we had a clarification that came in on the question about, is it better to organize an event for youth than a fellow youth to discuss the event's details of the event? Your thoughts on if you can answer that?
Well, I would err on the side of it being a learning opportunity for the youth. As mentors, you can be available to guide the process if needed, but see how they do it. There are more than one way to skin a cat, so they may do it differently, but if they get it done, then I would call that a success. If not, there may be learning opportunities for you to, share some tips on how to improve it, or step in before it becomes like a huge disaster, but see how they do it first.
And final question, any advice for how to reach out to Gen Z globally for recruiting activities, like messaging that might be attractive on to youth about scouting?
I would play up the popular apps or social media ways that they communicate. And again, I would definitely have it as a visual. If they can see people having fun or watch them having fun. I think I've actually heard a few times where it's like a new trend where people watch other kids playing video games now. So maybe showing a video of what scouting looks like, and just different activities, different experiences where they're having fun, just getting a glimpse into what it would be like if they joined.
Yeah, I've never considered having a Sea Scout Twitch channel where we broadcast an event before. That's actually kind of fascinating. Definitely something to think about. Milira, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. We'll have another webinar next month. We have multiple topics that are going to come out very soon. So for the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020 with a lot of dynamic content. And in the meantime, thank you all for your time and your service to youth. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day.